again, welcome back to another show. Today I'm looking at two Disney flops for beautiful disasters. Now Disney have, they tend to be bland. They tend to go for what's obvious and, it started out obviously with Walt Disney and they did some of those classic animations. Then even Disney in the 50s was doing Disney World rather than animations, and the animation stuff was starting to go downhill. Then he died and they were like, okay, what do we do now? And then he had a couple of decades of inertia. Then he changed the ways of doing things and became much more of a building company again that moved on from Disney, but still has the kind of family feel, but they have other outlets that can actually have, like darker films, like the Touchstone for a while. Now they've got Fox, they bought 20% of Fox. Now they own Marvel, they own Star Wars, they own tons of stuff. They're a monopoly basically at the moment. They're huge. Does not mean everything they do turns to gold. There's a lot of very bland, boring films in Disney Vault that you would not want to watch. From like 50s and 60s children's family films that are unwatchable, that everyone kids. Disney got a reputation for doing these live action films that no one wanted to see, and it's almost like torturing people to make them go, torturing kids to make them go and see these films. And then when they moved to more grown-up stuff, they tried to like do stuff when Star Wars was released to try and compete with like the Black Hole and Tron. Neither of which did that well, even though Tron's a cult film now. And they've had bombs. They've had some really big bombs over the years, and some of them are actually good. Even though there's a lot of bland stuff, every so often Disney goes crazy and produces something wonderful. Some of them I've already covered. I've already covered 13th Warrior, which is wonderful. I've covered Lone Ranger, which is a wonderful little film that got no respect. Today I'm going to do a double bill of two films that did badly on release but are actually worthwhile, which is Return to Oz and John Carter, or John Carter of Mars, as you find out it's really called at the end of the film when they have the vile title John Carter of Mars. So I always think it's John Carter of Mars, even though its official title was John Carter. But let's call it John Carter of Mars. That's what it should have been called. That's what they wanted to call it. It really is. That's what the whole story is about. Him becoming John Carter of Mars. So both these films, both had mega budgets at the time. Return to Oz was a big budget film in the 80s, and it got reputation of being nightmare fuel because it was way too scary for kids. Sort of like Black Cauldron. Disney went into dark stuff in the late 70s. It's quite interesting. Mixing that with stuff like Condom Man, which was unwatchable, they were doing these weird dark films. And in the 2012, it was released. John Carter was a mega budget film by Andrew Stanton. Now the big thing you'll notice about all these bombs is they were made by people who had a lot of success around at that time, and were basically given a blank check to Disney to go and do what they wanted. The Lone Ranger was a bomb, but it was like people did Pirates of the Caribbean with the same lead actor, so they gave him carte blanche to this weird dark film. Tron was to compete with Star Wars, which was a big, massive blockbuster. There was that. Return to Oz was based on Frank L. Baum novels, Oz novels, or L. Frank Baum, or who cares. And it was the unofficial producer was George Lucas, and one of his producers, Gary Kurtz, from the first two Star Wars films, was credited as one of the producers. Walter Murch, who directed it, is an old friend of George Lucas, and he was helping him out. And Lucas did a lot of this in the 80s. That people don't seem to remember. He helped get money for Mishima. He helped money from Kagamushu from Kurosawa. He helped Lawrence Kasdan with Body Heat. Behind the scenes, but didn't want credit because he didn't want his name on something that was more adult and it would cause confusion. The same thing with this one. He didn't want his name on it, but he was there. It was also Jim Henson. People were there helping do a lot of the effect stuff as well. So it was ILM and Henson dealing with a lot of the stop motion, the effects, and creating these creatures. But it wasn't a Jim Henson type of thing. It wasn't like the Muppets or anything. But there was bits where you needed something like Jim Henson there too. But it was really a George Lucas thing. This is more George Lucas thing. He was kind of in charge behind the scenes, unnamed, and he was actually going to step. He was like there to help out and also step in a watermark. Obviously, couldn't do it. And that was the thing that kind of got the film made. But then he supported much, and the film got made. And it was viewed as just as disturbing as Temple of Doom. Yeah, Lucas actually managed to get 2 years in a row. This was 85 and Temple of Doom was 84. 2 years in a row where he made the most disturbing film for children. That's applause worthy. 2 years in a row of scaring little buggers. And John Carter was a well-known property that tried to develop at Disney. No one, it wasn't going anywhere. Then Andrew Stanton, who did Wall-E and a bunch of Pixar stuff, wanted to direct a live-action film. And the last person from Pixar who did live action was Brad Bird, who had done Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol, which had made an absolute fortune and had, brought the series back to prominence. And so they thought, okay, we'll give Stanton a chance. And the film came out and it bombed. And something else came out and it bombed too, years and years before. So there's a lot of these films that come out. I mean, the 13th Warrior get made because it was a Crichton book after Jurassic Park, and it was directed by the guy who did Die Hard, John McTiernan. And it was written by the guy who wrote Terminator 2 as for the script. So there's lots of reasons why certain films get made. And then they see the film and go, oh, this was not what we thought this was going to make. Because when certain directors, when you kind of give them carte blanche, they take it. They don't mess around. It's like, okay, I might not get this chance again. I'm going to make the film I want to make. It's especially true in Return to Oz. But I mean, you can see it in John Carter as well. There's lots of stuff in there that was made because the person behind the camera loved this world and was going to put as much in as he could during the short time he had the power. So I'll start with Return to Oz. Eventually I got to the point. Return to Oz is a quasi-sequel to Wizard of Oz, but made by a different studio, obviously made like 50 years later. So obviously the cast was completely different. Fruza Balk, who became a good actress who was in a lot of stuff, was starring as Dorothy, and she was much more age appropriate than Judy Garland. But everyone was waiting for Judy Garland, and Balk kind of got criticism for not being as perky as Judy Garland. Like, no one's as perky as Judy Garland. It's not possible in a film. So, because she's played it as a little girl who was going through this adventure, it was like, it got criticism. I think she's terrific as Dorothy. I think she's much more likeable as Dorothy than Garland is. So it's like, depends your taste. But the film is dark. The film goes dark really quick. I remember I saw this as a kid. I went to the cinema to see this with my family. And it was scary. It really was. It was nightmare fuel. Which is wonderful. That's one thing about it is you see that film and you remember it. And I managed to watch it on projector so I could get an idea of the scope of it. And the scope's pretty good. The sense of, dread there is pretty good. I mean, the problem the film has is, one, when it's shrunk down to TV, it loses a lot of its scope. It feels even the sets look more like sets on TV than they do when you project it or watch it on a big screen. And the atmosphere is diluted slightly because of, if you're watching TV, you get distracted. And it's got kind of old world, old dark fantasy feel to it. So you can lose that element of the film on TV. So the film feels more bitty. Because, I mean, it ends on a battle of wits, basically, which on TV can feel like that's the ending. Well, in the cinema, it actually feels much more epic and much more inventive because it's as a story of someone learning to think their way through a situation. Because it basically started the thing. Dorothy has had an adventure in Oz. Now she's back and she wants to shut up about it, and everyone thinks she's mad. So they take her to a doctor who's going to give her electric shock treatment to try and get rid of Oz from her memories. And there's a storm. She escapes, and she ends up returning to Oz to find that Oz has been decimated by the Gnome King, who's apparently one of the big villains in the Oz series of books. The Emerald Forest has been trashed. The Yellow Brick Road has been destroyed. Has been just in chunks now. You know, that's always fun to see if you're a kid and go, "Oh my god, the Yellow Brick Road's gone." There's another wicked witch, played by Jane Marsh, who switches heads to everyone she wants. So she got all these. She can change her head so that she can be young and beautiful when she wants, or be scary Jane Marsh when she wants. And that's a really creepy sequence. This house full of these women's heads that she's taken from the city, and it's like, wow, that's a bit much for a 6-year-old. Most of this film's a bit much for a 6-year-old. And she goes to the Emerald City to find everyone's turned to stone, including the Tin Man, the Kit, and the Lion. Scarecrow's gone missing. The Scarecrow was the king of Oz when she left, and she has to find a way through the problem. Like, think a way through the problem, try and figure out what went wrong, how do you sort it. And she finds new allies. There's TikTok, who needs to be wound up all the time because he was like a soldier for the city, but he was allowed to wind down, so you need to come and wind him up to keep him working. There's Jack Pumpkinhead, or whatever, I can't remember the exact name for him. He's a guy with a pumpkin head, and he's a maid, and something's brought him to life, so he has to he can exist. He's worried his head is going to actually rot. And there's a goose. No, there's a kind of head of a animal that has been brought back to life, and now he's connected to a sofa and can fly. So each one of these characters are a bit darker. Instead of having Toto with her, she's got a talking chicken who's getting on a bit. So there's the characters are different. She's different companions. The companions do look a bit more less cartoonish, a bit more like older European style characters, which I love. But I mean, TikTok's great. TikTok's way better than the original Wizard of Oz characters for me. He's so good. But it is a different feel. You've got these villain characters running wheels who are the minions of the evil witch, whose castle they have to go into. They get caught, they have to get trapped and have to try and escape. They have to try and fly over the sand that it turns people to sand if you touch it. Yeah, there are those creepy things in this film. And you have to get to Gnome Kingdom and find out how he enslaved the Emerald City, what's happened to Scarecrow, and put everything right. But it's just dark. I mean, the big thing with leaving this film is it's dark. I mean, like, within 20 minutes, Dorothy's almost been electrocuted, and the Emerald City's been destroyed, and everything else. And the film is shot so it does not look like. It was shot by David Watkins, who did a lot of Richard Lester films. And it's a much more realistic feel. It looks beautiful, but it's a very different feel to it. It feels much more like a real place rather than painted backdrops. So that kind of adds a sense of darkness to it. The characters themselves chosen for this adventure are not cute like a Cowardly Lion. So that adds a bit of darkness to it. So the whole film has an element of darkness. Gnome King's played by Nicole Williamson, who also played the doctor in the early part of the film, and Jean Marsh played the nurse in the early part of the film, and she's a witch. And they are out to scare the kids, you know. And Nicole Williamson's really funny and really witty, but he's kind of malicious underneath the surface. He acts like a friend, but he's not. He gives that kind of performance. He's terrific as Gnome King, and he enjoys turning people into bits of furniture. And again, it's a very dark idea, trying to find like Dorothy and all her friends turned into objects rather than try to find a way out of the situation. So there's lots of wonderful things in it, and it's a wonderful children's film. And thank God it happened, and it could be protected by someone who could protect it, like George Lucas. Despite all the crap he's gotten over the years, he protected this film. And Disney released it and didn't have a clue what to do with it because it was way too dark. But they had someone in charge who they wanted to do theme park rides with. So it was like one of those things that they couldn't really do much with it. They had to just release it and hope for the best. And it came out and scared the kids and got complaints. And then it can disappear and it was viewed as a disappointment. It was like, why did they make this film? Walter Murch never directed another film again. Went back to being an editor. And he more or less suggested he didn't really enjoy directing as much as he thought he would. It was a very difficult job and maybe it didn't really suit him. But this is a great film to have actually had on your CV though, because this is really strong. It's one of those films that if a kid sees it, they will remember it. There's so many moments that are really dark and really wonderful. So it's one to see. It's really distinct. And for me it is... I much prefer this to Wizards of Oz. I'm also got a soft spot for Oz the Great and Powerful, even though it's got a lot of flaws too. And the Sam Raimi one. Right, so now we're going on to the John Carter. John Carter, as I said, was the debut of a Pixar animator, Andrew Stanton. It was his pet project. He loved it. He made a bunch of hits for Pixar, Disney. So they gave him this shot to make John Carter. And then by the time the film had even was getting close to coming out, it had already been viewed as a bomb. It just had this stink about it. It was like, what we don't want in this film. It had that kind of feel to it. I mean, there's plenty of films that get that. I mean, not long after it, the Wachowskis released Jupiter Ascending, which also did that same thing of like, even before it was released, it was getting bad-mouthed by everybody. Then you saw the film and it was like, Jupiter Ascending is much more flawed than this one. But it's still an individual film made by people who want to make the film. This one really got killed. I know one of the reasons is it feels like it's about two different films stuck into one, and there's some flawed elements to it. Like lead character John Carter. I'll explain the plot. Basically, he's a guy from Earth. He's working in the during the war. He's a soldier. At this point, he's looking for gold in mines in Indian territory. Gets caught up with the army. Has to run into a cave. Turns out this cave is a conduit that takes you to Mars. Some being has come from Mars. Tries to kill him, he kills them, and accidentally says a word that'll get him back to Mars. Once he's on Mars, he finds out that he actually can jump high. He's so super strong just because of the difference of Martians. Just because Mars is different from Earth, and what's in his bones makes him stronger, and he can jump higher. Basically, he's a Superman to a degree. And suddenly he's involved with all these politics in Mars, and he has to try and help one tribe that's of these creatures have 4 arms, and who's led by Willem Dafoe, and they're all CGI creatures, they're all green. Then there's other more human-looking characters. There's 2 factions, one's fighting the other. One of them's led by Dominic West, and one of them's led by Kieran Hines. He's got a daughter, and Dominic West has got a weapon. He can destroy everybody. So he wants the daughter's hand in marriage to bring together everyone's forces so he can be in charge of Mars. So there's those politics. Then into this comes John Carter, who just causes havoc because he doesn't know the rules. He learns how to talk like the Martians, and he's got these powers and ends up just causing havoc. And a lot of the plotting's behind the scenes plotting with these immortal characters who are out to manipulate the politics so that Mars and places like that don't get too advanced and cannot actually compete with them. So at some point, they're going to make sure the civilization will go off a cliff, and they'll put in charge people who are, dubious, who cause wars and things. So they're trying to protect themselves by manipulation. And Carter causes a lot of havoc with all these plans and starts fighting Dominic West's character. And it's basically a space opera. Your baddies, Dominic West, and these immortal beings. The good guys is the Princess of Mars, who Carter's trying to help, and they have a competitive relationship. You've got Willem Dafoe and his daughter, and Carter's looking after his daughter, who's like a young woman at this point, and because she's too kind, she's actually is viewed as a danger to the tribe. And there's this dog creature that is just lured to Carter from the off, and they go on an adventure to find this information about these creatures who are manipulating everything and try to work out how to defeat the villains. Very space opera, very Star Wars. Now this came before this. This is Pulp from Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote Tarzan. So this is like written like the turn of the 20th century, basically. And when it talks about the past, it talks about the Civil War, and it's got a lot of it's a lot of things that are kind of that era that nowadays you would say you can't do that, but and they get around it in most ways. Every so often, there's a little bit. Like, you explain that a bit more. The character looks dodgy, but it's a high fantasy world. You're not meant to take it too seriously. It's a fantasy, but these characters are trying to survive a bad situation because Mars, the planet's dying, and are trying to find ways to avoid the warfare, to create new technology so that the people on Mars can't survive. Which explains why the whole idea was that's why there's no one on Mars now, like, it died, or did they survive, type of thing. It's that kind of element. But it's really a fantasy. You've got these creatures fighting each other. You've got these vast arrays of, like, flying ships. And because Carter comes from the Earth, there's no flying ships where he comes from, so that confuses him. And there's just lots of, like, pulpy story ideas. It's basically pulp come to life. It's even pulp in Star Wars. It's got a kind of square-jawed hero. Tyler Kish plays a hero. He's enjoyable. The problem he has is his character's inconsistently written. Like, he's a character who is burnt out, but he also has to be a heroic character who does these brave things. And I try to do a kind of combination of he's burnt out, but his instincts he can't stop his instincts to help people. But he still gets selfish things to try and get back up to this gold. He knows there's gold in this mine, this cave that will make him rich. And they continue that well after the point where he's already acting a bit too selflessly for that to really be a coherent motivation. And that's one of the flaws in the middle part of the film, is like, this still is motivation. It doesn't feel his motivation over the last 20 minutes. Now they're bringing him back in. It's that kind of thing, is like, they should have reshot that and finessed it in some way, because it doesn't quite make sense. So there's little bits like that, and the film did have some reshoots, but it feels like there's still little gaps in there, and that's what stops it from being truly coherent. There's some exposition scenes that are there to explain things, and there's one scene that stops the film dead 20 minutes in to explain something, and it could have been a flashback. They could have moved it later and put it as a flashback, because it kind of tells you stuff you don't need to know at that point in the film, that you need to know like 20 minutes later, and it's like, why are we stopping for this? And it actually ruins the momentum of the film, because at that point you're with Carter going through discovering Mars, and it actually kind of takes away from his discovery of Mars. There's a lot of things like that you feel maybe that's just a reshoot, I don't know, but it's a bit forced in a way that doesn't really help the film. But those are like minor flaws, because what the film has is this sense of a open world that's very imaginative. Just the idea of Mars having a civilization and having these various warring tribes. You know, it just works. It's just a wonderful set of landscapes, and a character from the Civil War seeing these flying machines, and he can do all these special skills so he can fight them. It just works. It's pure pulp. I know it's pure pulp. As I said earlier, some of the things going to give them dramatic weight worked, but some things are a bit clumsy. But it doesn't matter ultimately because the film gets to where it's going and it works. Again, I saw this in a projector. He's trying to see it in the biggest screen as possible because you get more of the world there and you get a sense of scale of the things he can do that pay off a lot more. There's some really good sequences, like when he first gets to Mars, he has to try and discover his powers. And unlike someone like Superman, where he discovers them quite easily, here he just looks like a clumsy wolf trying to work it all out because he doesn't get it, and he makes a complete arse of it to start with, which is a lot funnier. And there's just lots of wonderful moments of where he goes to this old city, this ancient city that's you have to go down the river to, and the river's almost this cursed river. People go to die. It's got a wonderful atmosphere to it. There's a scene where Carter takes on an entire army of these creatures because he's at special powers, and he beats the crap out of them as he kind of. And it's kind of a pulpy scene, but it's also a scene where he's coming to terms with the fact that he fought the war and his wife and child died during the war and all the guilt he stored up. It's the point where he starts to switch a little and slowly come round. But that comes before the bit where he's still after the gold. So it feels like he's had the cleanse and then he's still after this selfish thing, which is the awkward bit. But the sequence itself is wonderful because it's a mix of pulp and raw emotion, and in a pulpy way that just works. So there's lots of wonderful bits of pulp. One of the good things we've seen in Projector is the final fight. When you see it in TV, you lose a lot of the scale because it's a big epic scale thing. When you see it in TV, it looks small and it's like very clunky. But when you see it like in a bigger screen, it feels much more epic and it feels much more powerful. And it does have a kind of darker ending than usual. I mean, there is a suggestion of a bit of a happier ending just at the last second of the film, but it is like him because at some point he gets tricked by the villain and he gets stuck back on Earth and has to find his way back to Mars, which is the finale point. So because he's dealing against these immortals who are quite sneaky. So John Carter is wonderful. It's very underrated. I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful pulpy sensibility that is pure pulp in a way that some of the Star Wars really isn't. Star Wars is the George Lucas version of that. Which means there's lots of pulpy stuff, there's lots of other stuff that he's obsessed by as well that's not pulp. This one's more pure pulp, 30s sensibilities. There's lots of stuff you've seen Star Wars that's in this film because it got it first. It started it. So it influenced all these pulps. So there's certain things that they can't avoid because they can't avoid looking like a bit of a rip-off even though they originated it. Just the way it goes. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back soon with some more, but that's me for now. Right, bye.